Welcome. This presentation is available for MCLE self-study credit. If you would like to receive credit, you must take 3 actions. First, click Show More text below on our YouTube page. The text will expand and show a link to download the handout materials. Once you finish watching this presentation, please click the quiz link to receive self-study credit. Once the quiz is successfully completed, you will receive a certificate via email within 72 hours. We hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you. All right, welcome everybody to today's MCLE program, Heavy Hitters, speaking of mediation strategy from both plaintiff and defense perspective. Without any further ado, I would love to introduce today's moderator and leader of the panel, John Drath. John is one of the neutrals with ADR Services, Inc. He brings over 40 years of legal expertise to his ADR practice and has developed a reputation as being a skilled and efficient mediator with exceptional ability to isolate the key factors in a case and bring the parties together to reach resolution. He's conducted over 1,000 mediations and attended hundreds more as an advocate in virtually all areas of tort and contract law. Thank you so much, John, for organizing today's panel and bringing us together for this discussion on mediation from both sides' perspective.
Thank you, Katie. Well, let me start by introducing our panelists. I'm not going into the bios simply because of the interest of time. We have 4 highly accomplished, highly experienced trial lawyers, 2 from the plaintiff side and 2 from the defense side. On the plaintiff side, we have Doris Cheng from Walkup, Melodia, Scheley, and Schoenberger, and Craig Peters from Altair. On the defense side, we have Chris Scheley from Clapp, Moroney, Vucinich, Beeman, and Scheley, and Amee Mikacich from Hinshaw, Culbertson. And as a bonus, we have a person who's in most mediations, one of the 2 most important people in the room, and that is an actual decision maker. Former defense attorney herself, we have Patti Fama from Pacific Specialty Insurance Company. Thank you all for attending. Now, let me just jump right into it. What's the best time to have a mediation? Well, when all sides are ready to talk, of course, but are there some cases that maybe are best suited for mediation before any lawsuit is filed? Amee, let me throw that out to you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for inviting me today. Yeah, there are definitely cases that are suited for pre-mediation, pre-litigation mediation. I would say those are going to be your potentially high-profile cases, cases involving sensitive facts. Examples might be workplace harassment, fraud type cases, cases that you want to keep out of the press. But pre-litigation mediation can also be appropriate in a garden variety personal injury case where you want to avoid costs and save money. And I have had instances where both sides were motivated to mediate before launching into full-blown litigation. And mediation can be very effective in those situations.
Okay. Patti, how and when do you engage in pre-litigation mediations?
Thanks also, John, for having me today. We like to go to, or we'll consider going to pre-litigation mediation when we have cases where we can see that both sides are really working to put out and really understand what's going on with the case, so that when we go, even though we haven't had formal discovery, that we get a full understanding of the facts and we have an open and honest discussion about whether we can actually bring the case to resolution before everybody's off in full litigation.
Okay, Craig, let me ask you, I'm wondering what the downside would be to going to mediation for pre-litigation mediation for the plaintiff side, but are there downsides?
I don't think there's any particular downside beyond, it being a waste of time. And the older I get, the more valuable time becomes. And so I think, kind of to Patty's point, if you're engaged in discussions with the other side, they're sharing, you're sharing, they're interested in pre-litigation mediation, then to me, that tends to make sense. I've never suggested it myself in a case, because usually the other side knows when they're ready better than I do. So I'm not going to try to push something on them that they're not ready for. But if they're recommending it and suggesting it, and we've been exchanging information, then the only downside is just your time.
Okay. Chris, time to pick a mediator. What's the process you use, and what are the criteria you follow?
Let me also thank you, John, for including me in the panel. These esteemed attorneys, and Patti, the decision maker. So frankly, I want to have somebody that the other side trusts and recommends. So I will, particularly when I'm dealing with experienced attorneys on the other side, such as Doris or Craig, I'll invite them to recommend some mediators. Obviously we want somebody who's experienced. I prefer mediators who've actually tried cases, because I think they, understand the mechanics of a case better than perhaps somebody who hasn't. So, but really, if the other side recommends somebody who I know and do my research on is going to be capable, then I want that person, because they'll have the ear of my opponent.
Doris, same question.
Chris and I look for a lot of the same things. Experience is huge. I mean, not just trial experience, but experience in working with multiple parties. And I really appreciate a lawyer who understands the insurance side and the defense side, and where people are getting money, right? I mean, I think that's something that we often don't look at enough on the plaintiff side, which is, if I get a verdict, I don't care where the money comes from, right? But when you're in settlement negotiations, there's a lot of people who have restrictions on where money's coming from. They can or can't use them. They may be earmarked in some way where you can or can't access them. And so having a mediator who knows how to untangle that, which typically means they have had a lot of experience either in mediation and seeing the other side, or, I'm going to pitch John because it's true. One of the benefits of having John as your mediator is, like, he's already been through that. He knows the difficulties that the defense lawyer may have, and what the difficulties of the insurance carriers may have. And then, sorry,
I was just going to say, including insurance coverage issues, which can always put a wrench in things.
Right. And which layers come first, and what towers mean. And, when it gets sort of sophisticated, where frankly, a lot of times that information is shielded from the plaintiff lawyers. Like, that's usually not my problem until, Patti can't pay me enough. It's like, well, wait, I guess that is my problem.
Until it is your problem. Yeah.
And then, so there's that level of experience, but also when we say someone who's tried cases, knowing the ins and out of evidence, but also having some, competency and knowledge about what is happening in the marketplace. I think some of us would say that post-COVID, these verdicts actually look a little bit higher than what we saw pre-COVID. And so having someone with that kind of money consciousness experience is really helpful. And the last thing is sensitivity to clients. And I think you can only know this by checking with other mediators or lawyers if you haven't had experience with a mediator before. Because I really appreciate mediators who respect the attorney-client relationship and who are not tone deaf to potential sensitivities. Assume first that since you've never met these plaintiffs, that you don't know what they're thinking, and assume, in fact, that this may be, very anxiety producing, or that you as the mediator can't control them. And so I really appreciate mediators who, defer to the plaintiff lawyer, I'm sure the defense lawyer too, as to how much direct communication they should have with the client.
Speaking of insurance companies, Patti, talk to us about what information an insurance company needs to go to mediation, and how far in advance of that mediation they need that information.
Well, I think foremost, we need a thorough and complete evaluation. We need to understand who the parties are, how they'll present, what story they're going to tell. We need to know what the witnesses are going to say. We need to understand, the liability picture, the damages. We need as much information as we can so that we get a realistic view of what our the benefits or risks are, whether we resolve at a mediation or whether we need to proceed further in the litigation. As to timing, I'm with a smaller company and we can move faster than some of the maybe other carriers might. I like to have things at least a few weeks ahead so that we can have time to talk with our defense counsel, decide, how we're going to approach things. Other carriers may need a longer run time before mediation. But I would say generally before deciding to go to mediation or agreeing to, we pretty much have a good understanding of whether it's a good case and we have enough information to go to a meaningful mediation.
What happens when you go to mediation and there's new information, new damages, surprise information? How does that affect your ability to resolve the case?
Not my favorite way to learn about information in a litigation. I think that goes to building the relationship about whether we're going to be honest and open advocates about what's going on with the case. So I'd say it's best if something comes up late in the game, get it to us before the mediation. So at least we have time to digest it and meaningfully discuss it at mediation.
If I could piggyback on that, John and Patti, I would say that timing depends upon the gravity of the case and the value of the case. I mean, certain large national, international insurance companies have levels of authority. And if you're talking, about a 7 or 8 figure case, there are many levels of authority you have to get through, and many cooks in the kitchen that are going to want to see what the ingredients are. So, it's important for most carriers, I think, to have at least 30 to 45 days where they got the information. And then in the really larger cases, I have to prepare 60 to 90 day pre-mediation reports if we're talking, 7 to 8 figure cases. So to me, that means it's really helpful if you have an opponent who's going to provide you with the backdrop documentation you need, i.e. life care plans, economist reports, things of that nature. We can get those to the carriers, then they can evaluate the case. So timing is critical.
And a demand, I assume.
Always good to get a demand.
Okay, all right. Craig, let me ask you, what steps should plaintiff's attorneys take to try and avoid mediation being a waste of time? Do you look at trying to set pre-mediation parameters, anything like that? Yep, you went on mute.
Sorry, I look at mediation much like I look at my cases, right? And ultimately, I'm looking at them from the lens of trial. So I start at the end and I work my way back. Same thing with mediation. I think about the end of mediation that's successful. What does it look like? There's not just a resolution, there's an actual resolution. So before I go to mediation, I want a settlement agreement in place that everybody's agreed to. So when we get to the end of the mediation, if we've agreed on the number, because 99% of the time, that's all you're negotiating over is the number. Everybody signs the document and there aren't months of negotiations back and forth about liens or set asides or whatever else there might be. It also gives me a good sense of whether the other side's serious or not. If they can't negotiate in good faith to get a settlement agreement that doesn't have a number in it, I know there's probably a good chance that mediation is going to be a waste of my time. So that's the first thing I make as a requirement for the cases that I control that are going to mediation. The second is I want a number back. I want to know that the other side has taken the time and put the time into the case to give me a number back, a counter that is meaningful. Again, If they're going to mediation in good faith, they should already have a number in mind. They shouldn't need any evaluation by me to give me a number, right? Now, my job is to talk to the defense attorney on the other side and try and get a good sense from her about, what are the issues that you think are most salient in this case? Because I've moved away from having these mediation briefs that are sort of the generalist mediation brief, right? They're covering all the topics. I find those are a lot of time. And again, time's my most valuable commodity these days. I'm not going to put that time in anymore. Unless the other side tells me they need that. And if the defense attorney tells me she needs that, I'll do it. But typically what I hear is, here is where we think the problem is. We think there's a fundamental duty problem. We think there's a fundamental causation problem. They're always going to disagree with my damages. So I don't really spend a whole lot of time discussing that with them. I'm always going to give them the kind of the full Monty, if you will, on damages. But I want to know where on the rest of it, before we get to damages, where are the points of contention so that I can address those and hopefully speak to not just the defense attorney who I'm having the conversation with, but the Patties of the world that are, evaluating these things and trying to figure out how much money to put on this or not.
Doris, let me jump over to you because this is a subject that defense attorneys typically know nothing about, and that is what's involved in preparing a plaintiff for a mediation. These people are not experienced. This is a strange process by any expression or any description. And so how do you go about getting them ready for this?
The two main issues with preparing the plaintiff in terms of managing their expectations, I would say the first thing is you got to manage the expectations. I'm sure everybody agrees with that on this panel, whether you're the plaintiff side or defense side. One is managing the expectations about the process, because it can be slow and frustrating, right? And the other is managing their expectations about the type of responses to numbers, meaning, and I generally tell my clients, don't listen to the first or second number. This is like telling your kid, you can't go outside today. Maybe you need to say it 4 times in 4 different ways before people actually believe you can't go outside. And sometimes, you get responses that don't look like they're going anywhere, but there's messaging happening all the time. And you just have to be careful and mindful about listening to the message and not getting frustrated that this is never going to settle. And I would say that's a big part of trusting the mediator. And I usually talk about the mediator in that way too, about what their job is, what their role is, and what they're trying to accomplish. And, we wouldn't have agreed to that mediator if we didn't think that person could carry out the process in a way that would best position everybody, and namely us. That's the goal. And in terms of managing the expectations, it's and I should say, when managing expectations about how the process will go with a back and forth of numbers, I think it's also incumbent upon the plaintiff's attorney to set up some expectations about what the range is, reasonable settlement range, when you consider the strengths of the liability, the strengths of the causation and damages, the venue, what happens in this jurisdiction. I've decided that I actually don't want to try more cases in Humboldt for a good reason. That jury came back in less than 2 hours, and not for me. So, but those are all important factors in discussing with the client, so that everybody, I think, goes through the exercise of what's a fair and reasonable place to go. In fact, I think when we were, Craig and I and John and were talking at some other point, I said, I know I'm always fair. It doesn't mean I'm always reasonable. And that's what a good mediator is supposed to do, is at least keep me reasonable. And in terms of managing the expectations about the process, people have to bring a book, they have to bring other things to keep them occupied, because the mediator is not going to be in our room. And that seems obvious, but as I say, with managing expectations, the big thing is not having somebody frustrated with the process so that it ends the communication. There's a time and a place to say we're walking away and communications end, but, not prematurely, not before, not before, from my perspective, giving the defense attorney, ample time to adjust, acclimate to what I'm saying, what gets the case settled, giving enough time for the mediator to, get the most and the best out of everybody in terms of the participation and their candor. I think the best mediations are ones where the mediator is able to get people to be as candid as possible about where they want to end up and where they see the real value of things.
Yep. Craig mentioned briefs. Just quickly, on the defense side, is there anything that you don't want to see in a plaintiff's brief that's counterproductive? I'll throw that out to Patti and Amee. Patti, you.
Well, I'll go first. I think, it's interesting nowadays. It seems that it's about 50-50 whether the briefs are confidential or not. I know most mediators that I've worked with vastly prefer that we exchange our briefs. And in a typical brief, I like to focus on the positive points in the case. If we've had the luxury of a pre-mediation call, which I know we're going to talk about here in a minute, that is where I would typically disclose the weaknesses. I think you have to be frank and honest about the weaknesses in your case. But in a brief, I typically want to focus on the positive points, focus on our strengths, focus on what I think is going to take us across the finish line at the end of the day. And let me add one other thing. I think it's important to message and convey that you're there in good faith, and you really want to try to resolve this case, and you recognize that it's going to save everybody time and money if you can, and that's important as well.
Right, and I would just echo what Amee said, that it's very important that the briefs, you're putting your best case forward, presenting everything you've got, but I think you also need the candor and the honesty to be able to, and the trust of the mediator that you can talk about what those weak spots are, with the hope that you might get communication back from the other side about other, their weak spots, so that we can, kind of honestly get to the end to see what the case is really valued at and whether we can resolve it.
Okay. Amee brought up pre-mediation, or I'm sorry, pre-mediation calls with the mediator, whether the mediator initiates it or you do. Let me ask Doris, what topics, or what are you trying to accomplish at a pre-mediation call with the mediator?
One, I always want to make sure the mediator kind of has a lay of the land. Like, how did we get here? Because that communication is really helpful for giving the mediator, some sense of what the issues are, what they can focus on. I mean, there's no reason to let the mediator go into this blind and, figure it out as he or she is in the moment. Like, we've generally, the mediation is set up because we've already had some discussion. There's a willingness to settle. There's some idea about, do we want to try to get this resolved? So I like the mediator to know that. And because sometimes cases are really contentious and it can't be helped, not because we're not civil, but we just vehemently disagree. And I like to make sure the mediator knows that too, so that he or she can kind of massage these issues. Again, I know I'm fair. If I'm not reasonable, the mediator is going to check me. But, like John, you should know in advance, like what I've been fighting with Chris about. And so you can kind of broker the issue and the relationship. And not the relationship long-term, but I mean, in this moment in this advocacy, like Sure. This is what you're going to meet head on. John, and so don't shy away from it. And then I also, want them to know anything about anything that's going to potentially derail. So for instance, if I haven't gotten discovery yet that is critical for me to evaluate the case, and truthfully, maybe it's more the other way around. I haven't given Amee what she needs yet, right? And she's like, well, I'm having a hard time explaining how to put a number on this when you haven't given me, the cell phone records from that day or something like that. And I'm giving arguments as to why it doesn't matter. And I may need John to broker that. So everything that is a potential hindrance in the ability to communicate. And I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier. When I select a mediator, I really am looking for someone who's a good communicator, because sometimes you can't deal, I know you're going to talk about this, John, in whole numbers, and there's a different way to communicate where you want to end up. It may be in brackets, it may be in hypotheticals, it may be in some other way, and so having good communication begins with that talk with the mediator.
Pre-mediation calls are critical, I think, particularly when you're dealing with insurance coverage issues. I like to have a pre-mediation call with the mediator so that I can tell her the flavor, give her the flavor of the case, let her know the personalities, because, as a defense lawyer, we're juggling multiple personalities. We're juggling the decision maker, our clients, sometimes our clients' personal attorneys, sometimes coverage counsel for our clients and coverage counsel for the carrier. And I kind of want to give the mediator a lay of the land so that they can understand, who's ultimately going to be able to get the case resolved. For example, if I've got, limited limits, but I have a client who has assets, how many assets do they have? Do we have an asset declaration? And so I think those are critical things that I'm not going to put in a mediation brief. I do also want to reiterate that I think it's very helpful to exchange briefs, because, defense lawyers are going to tell their clients and carriers their view. It's good for the clients and the carriers to see the other side's view. I would recommend that vitriol remain eliminated from mediation briefs, because that's not terribly helpful. But your story, as plaintiff's lawyers, it's helpful for us to be able to present those to people like Patti and our clients when they have personal asset exposure.
Yeah, there seems to be some regional differences as to whether briefs are exchanged or not. I've learned that since COVID. Let me.
You're not talking about Southern California, are you?
Oh no, I wouldn't do that. There's probably a lot of Southern Californians on the in the audience. So, Craig, here's a challenging question, I think. How do you evaluate a case for settlement purposes? And then how do you decide on an opening number?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a one size fits all for this question. I mean, it does depend on the type of case, and depends on the client and their circumstances. If I had to generalize, what I'm typically doing is, what are the damages that I think I can prove and get a jury to agree to on my best day, right? I'm always looking for my best day number as a starting point. I always know what my worst day is. That's the nice thing about being a plaintiff's attorney. I know what that day looks like. That's a 0, right? So that's the easy end of the scale. The best day is the hard end of the scale. But once I get that, then I can, and I usually will test that against what I see out there in, jury verdict results. And then from there, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do I think is going to happen, 70% of the time when I try this case, right? And this all becomes reading tea leaves a little bit. I'll admit there's, it's more art than science. But I'm trying to figure out where that 70% number is. So that's not my best day anymore. That's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. And depending on the case, sometimes it's going to be high middle, sometimes it's going to be low middle. I'm taking into account any challenges I think I might have on liability causation issues, for that matter, sometimes even damage issues. And then for settlement purposes, I'm figuring I'm probably going to end up somewhere around the midpoint of where I think I'm going to end up 70% of the time, and shave off a few bucks for the benefit of getting the case resolved early and not having to go through a trial. That's kind of generally the calculus I go through. And again, I'll admit it sounds like math, but it's not, because I'm a lawyer, and so I'm not good at math. It's more just it's a gestalt, if you will, of kind of what I think those numbers work out to. So that's how I get to, you know, where I think the settlement value is, right? I'm not settling at what I think I'm going to do in trial, because I mean, why would Patti pay me what I'm going to get at trial? She's going to make me go to trial and get it, right? That's fair. So it's got to be some number below that. And then in terms of my opening number tends to be right around in that range where, you know, I think my best day is. It's the number I can say with a straight face. It's a number I think I could get on a good day with a, you know, a jury that's got 9 folks that tend to think in the way a plaintiff's attorney would want them to think.
Interesting.
That's usually where I start.
The process isn't all that much different on the defense side, I think.
At all.
Doris, I do have a question for you. What happened to my question? How do you control messaging in terms of your opening offers? For example, if you're opening demand is, you know, twice what you hope to get eventually. How do you prevent the defense from interpreting that as, well, that's 3 times what you want?
I tell the mediator that. I'm all for transparency on that, because, you know, and I think you can see what happens in some more in the maybe first, second, third moves. And if they're interpreting, oh, this, you must have meant half of this. And, you know, hopefully, I mean, if I'm in a case where, you know, the other side and I have had many cases together, I think they interpret that better. They know that when I give a number, I'm trying to be closer to where we want to end up so that we don't have polarized views. And if I'm really that far off, you know, there's information I don't have. And my hope is that people don't look at me generally and say, oh, that's a 50% lawyer. I don't want to be known as that person. You know, and so if I feel like it's going that direction, I actually tell the mediator, you need to make sure that they know that we didn't come in here thinking that this was at half of this. They shouldn't interpret that. And if they're frustrated that, you know, I'm slowing down, it's because I want to make sure they're not misled. And that kind of is my communication now with a lot of mediators. It's more important for me that the other side isn't misled by what I'm saying. It's not, you know, the table thumping. It's not the I insist on that. It is, as I say, communication. If they're thinking this, can you dispel them of that now, John? Just tell them that's not where we're going. And if we don't agree in another hour or two, fine, we can walk away. But it wasn't because there was miscommunication. I mean, that seems to be, you know, a pretty lame thing at the end of the day, not to have a successful mediation, that we just didn't adequately communicate, because that really is our job as lawyers. My job is actually to speak for somebody else. And if I do a bad job of it, you know, well, shame on me.
Chris, what goes into an opening offer?
Well, what's the demand? I mean, really, that is a key. It also depends on who your adversary is. I mean, you know, there are lawyers that we know that you know, ask for 10 times that which the case is worth, and so we will adjust accordingly. When I'm dealing with straight shooters, like the folks in this room, you know, I'm going to be less inclined to discount things based upon their opening demand. But, you know, you got to adjust to what their demand is. And obviously, you know, I don't know that the plaintiff's bar understands this, but, you know, experienced folks probably do. The insurance companies have evaluated this case. They, particularly if it's a high value case, they have suit committees. They have follow-up calls with the defense lawyers where you get grilled like you're on the stand and you're the defendant. And they are very, I don't want to say hostile, but they're very aggressive. And they're asking every question in the world of the defense attorney to try and evaluate the case. And so, and, you know, if it's getting into the higher levels, you're talking, you know, vice presidents, presidents making these decisions. And so they know what they're going to pay. And to the extent I know what they're prepared to pay, then I have to read the other room to find out where we can get to that, to that place where everybody's going to be a little bit disappointed. But I will tell you this, from a defense standpoint, we don't always know where they want to go anymore. I mean, we used to be their allies. I can't say that they're always our allies. So oftentimes I don't know what their end game is, but that makes it really interesting.
Present company accepted, of course.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I want to move along a little bit more quickly. I want to get to this demo, but before I do, there's one area that I did want to hear some comment on, and that is the idea of joint sessions. Back last century, when mediations were getting started, that was de rigueur, right? Everybody started with a joint session. Then it went to nobody was doing joint sessions. Yeah, maybe there's a reason to have joint sessions. So just from the plaintiff standpoint, do either of you see any benefit to having joint sessions? And you're on mute, Craig.
I'm off.
Okay.
I think there's a huge potential benefit. I don't think it's, again, it's not one size fits all. I don't think every case it's the right thing, but I've had cases within the recent past where we've ended up doing a joint session, not at the beginning, kind of as, maybe used to be the typical way to do it, but at some point during the mediation, when the mediator felt like there was a point at which some good could come from a presentation. And, kind of to Chris's point and Patty's point earlier, the decision makers for the money, they have a filter. They have their own personal filter, as we all do. We all have a filter that we see things through. But then they've also got, the defense attorneys, the other people in their office, they've got all these other folks that are talking to them. So sometimes, and the same thing happens for us, by the way. I'm not saying this is specific to defense. We, on the plaintiff side, same thing happens, right? We get the echo chamber and our case is great and we're going to, it's going to be a huge verdict. And so I think that's where it becomes beneficial, is for those folks on the other side, particularly the folks who, are the decision makers as it relates to the money, to be able to see directly and hear directly from somebody who's got that dramatically different viewpoint in a way that is effective, that's not attacking, that's that's persuasive in a way that doesn't that makes it accessible to that person, right? And that's a challenge. And so I think two kind of personalities matter in terms of whether a joint session makes sense or not.
Excuse me. I think that I can tell the defense side that the lawyers on the other side are very, very accomplished, very effective, and they can hear that from their own defense counsel. But sometimes it's more impactful if you actually make a presentation and they can come to that conclusion themselves, so they know who they're dealing with. All right. I'd like to move to this hypothetical. It's in for the folks in the audience. It's in your materials, but basically what we have here is a kind of a typical situation. We've got a auto versus a motorcycle accident. There's a comparative fault component. There's a general agreement that the verdict range is between, in terms of the evaluation of the damages, between 1.5 and 2.5. We don't know what those damages are, but just assume that's what they're worth. And we've gotten to mediation, and after several moves in a couple of hours, there hasn't been a lot of progress. The plaintiff started at 3.5, the defense started at 100. And now here we are a couple hours later, the plaintiff is down to 3, and the defense is just made the move to 250. And what we're going to do is I'm now going to move into quote unquote the plaintiff's room. The defense will block out their videos, and I'm going to have a conversation with the plaintiff's attorney about how to respond to this lack of movement, if you will. And once I have their response to that, then I'm going to jump back into the defense room and we're going to try and settle this case. Okay. All right. So if Chris and Patti and Amee block out your screens. Okay. So not good news. The defense only moved to 250. I know that both sides are disappointed at this point. I think the problem here is, both of you have quite a bit of room to move from my conversations with you, but nobody's willing to make that leap of faith to make a big move for fear that it's not going to be met in like kind. And I think that's probably a legitimate concern. So it seems to me your options are to walk, which I don't recommend, to make a big move, to make another small move, or perhaps present a bracket to try and give them an idea where they might be able to settle this case. I mean, right now you're at 3. Got my own thoughts about where you might have to end up, but you got a ways to go. So, questions, comments?
What are your thoughts about where you think we should end up? And what are your thoughts right now about the best way to communicate a response?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to provide a bracket that's the midpoint is still higher than you're willing to settle, but down at a level where it gives the other side some hope. The lowering the meat low enough for the dog to jump, right? So those are my thoughts. I mean, I can talk about the value of the case, but I mean, I think you both are highly experienced, recognize the exposure. You got a motorcycle rider and always a concern when you got a motorcycle rider as a client. It's unlikely you're going to find 9 people who've never, had the crap scared out of them when a lane splitter went by. So there's gonna be some people on a jury who maybe are not crazy about motorcycle riders. So you've got that concern and the speed, but legitimate injury.
John, we have to commit them to being above $1 million. This is not a case that's going to settle for under $1 million, and that's what they're signaling. I think that's a problem, and I don't want to cut off Craig because I know he has an answer as to what our response is.
That's a legitimate point, and I think they may hope to keep it at or below $1 million. I don't think that that's realistic, and we're going to have to work on that. But that's probably where they are at that point. But let's give them some reason to move.
So are you telling us, John, that you think that they understand that the case is at least a 7-figure case, or no?
I think that they recognize that it's probably going to take something in 7 figures to settle the case.
Okay.
And you're not saying they've committed to that.
Well, we got some work to do. That's all I can say.
So I think that's what our interest is, if we're going to counter and we're going to do a bracket, we want their number has to be a 7-digit number so that we just at least know we're generally in the same ballpark, right? Right now we're in like different counties, but we need to be in the same ballpark. So, I propose that they come up to $1 million, right? That's as low as you can go and still be in 7 digits, but that at least tells us and signals to us that they're serious about trying to settle it today, and they've got the cash to do it. And then we make a significant jump.
And
So where's the other end of that bracket?
2.6.
Okay.
And I think I'm going to defer to you here just because I think we're going to run out of time. But, I think if you're, and Craig and I have gotten authority from our client for this. So if you want to take back to 8 because they're not ready to be in brackets, that's fine. But we want to see them in 7 figures. So you can take also a bracket back to them of 1 to 2.6. And
Okay.
I'm going to defer to since you're the vault and you know what's going on in that room, I'm going to defer to you as to what the better message is for them. But if we're formally still in whole numbers or whatever you want to call it in your lingo, distributive bracketing or distributive bargaining, whatever it is, then you can give them a whole number too.
Okay, all right, good. Why don't you block out, and I'm going to get back into the defense room at this point. So I'm back, and just briefly, let me mention to the audience, for those of you who are not acquainted with bracketing. Bracketing is simply a means of communication when parties are fairly far apart. And nobody wants to make a big move. The bracket provides information to the other side as to where the case might be settled, and you generally look at the midpoint. So that's what the plaintiff has done. They've moved to a bracket. My guess is you're not going to be thrilled with the bracket, but nevertheless, it's movement. If you go to 1 million, they will go to 2.6. So that's their proposed bracket.
Well, that's not very encouraging.
Well, it should be. They were 3 before. Now you're looking at a midpoint that's at least starts with a 1.
Yeah, but we're talking high 1, and the cases are worth high 1s.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to agree with Chris here. I know nobody wants to talk about the facts of the case, but we have a significant comparative negligence argument here, if not entirely caused by the plaintiff in this case. But we're here in good faith. We want to try to resolve the case. We want to make everybody's time and effort mean something. So, but that number is just way outside the range of what we have been considering in good faith.
Okay. Well, what? If we have the time to do this, what do you see as your best case and your worst case?
Well, I think we could defense the case at least a couple times out of 10. The worst case would be, 2. Two and a half, but we're going to get at least 25% comparative fault. So, John, you got an idea where we think this case should go. I would propose a counter bracket.
Okay.
To get us in that kind of range. And I'm terrible at math, so John, as a mediator, this is what we're paying you to do.
I got my calculator ready.
Right.
We don't want to pay 7 figures, but we know we have to at some point. The question is, how close can we keep it to 1? So if we get a bracket that would put the midpoint at like 1.2, we might be able to live with that.
Okay. So let's see. Now you're going to make me do some math. See. So so if you go to 800 and they go to let's see, 1, 6. That's a midpoint of 1, 2, right?
Mhm.
Okay, what you want to do?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, let me get back to the plaintiff side. Okay, Doris and Craig. Amee, watch your screen there.
Amy's fine.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right, so we are running out of time, but the good news is, well, bad news is they didn't accept your bracket. The good news is they came back with one that has a midpoint of over $1 million. They'll go to 800 if you go to 1.6. You know, just looking at, you know, your best day, worst day in this case, I would say that your worst day is probably 750. In other words, if they come in at 1.5 for damages and hit your guy with 50% comparative, that's 750. Your best day is probably a little over 2. So I'm seeing the.
I think Doris can get 5.
Pardon me?
I think Doris can get 5 on this case.
Okay. Probably.
I think Craig can get 10, so long as he doesn't bring it up.
Let me ask you this. Let me make a mediator's proposal for a bracket. Will you go to 1.6 if they'll go to $1 million?
You know, no. Because that puts us too low, and that's not really a place where we want to live. I mean, if there's midpoint here, suggestion is 1.2 to our 1.8, you know, it seems to me the midpoint of the midpoint is 1.5. And I don't know if you have any sense of whether they'll go there. We only have 6 minutes left, and if today is moving day, then I'm going to say, what do you suggest? And do you think there's a media's proposal? Let me tell you, if your media's proposal is 1.3, the answer is no. That's the midpoint between 1 and 1.6. Craig, are you okay with that?
Well, yeah, and I know you don't like 1.3, but you know, 1.3 today is probably more like 1.4 or 1.45 at trial when you get through the expenses, and I'm sure your guy'd like to get some money, and there's risk involved. I just don't think I can push them to 1.5.
Well, if you look at the midpoints of our numbers, right, it's 900 and 2.1, right? If you take their numbers, they're low and our low, and you average them. You take our high and their high, and you average them. You get 900 on their end. You get 2.1 on our end. Feels like they're probably at 1.5, right? Because they're countering our bracket. So it feels like 1.8 is not really a stretch. Peanuts for the insurance company.
I just don't get the sense that I'm going to get them to 1.5. But what's your response to their bracket?
How about we don't respond? Would you be willing to go back and just feel them out and find out where they are in terms of if we're looking at midpoints now?
Okay.
Right. So they got a midpoint, we got a midpoint, take the average of the midpoints. Are they saying, yeah, that's out of the league, or are we getting close to a point where maybe you might be able to step in and say, I kind of have a sense of where folks are, and I actually do think I can probably come up with a number that everybody can go home equally unhappy about?
Well, before I go into that room, I need to have some better idea of what that number might be. Are you prepared to take less than 1.5?
No. But we will take less than 1.8.
Okay. Okay. Let me jump in the defense room.
just want you to know how long I had to work on Doris to agree to go below 1.8. So doing the heavy lifting here, John.
Okay, all right. We have 3 minutes. Okay. They are not willing to respond to your bracket. They see the midpoint of the brackets at 1.5. And I don't think they're going to go below that. Question is, can you get there?
I don't know that we can, John, unless, council here needs to help me see the light, why we should go that high, but I don't see it right now.
Okay. Amee or Chris? Chris, you're on mute.
Go ahead, Amee, if you.
Yeah, no, I agree with Patti. I think, obviously we're here because we want to try to resolve the case, but we are, that's a little too rich for our blood right now. And we were pretty clear at the outset, where we thought we could go. And that's gonna be a little bit too much. I understand that no one is going to be 100% happy. Everybody's going to be a little bit unhappy with the final, but that's beyond our means right now.
John, and we've worked together so long and so often that I think we can be transparent. Our value of the case is settlement value is 1 to 1.5. So they're pushing us to the high end of our settlement value of the case. And are they really going to try this case over $200,000? And what's that going to net their client? What's the net to their client after they get their 40%? You're talking 60% of that. They're going to wait another year if we even get a courtroom. I'm ready to walk.
Okay. And so you're telling me that 1.3 is your top number?
Well, it is, but if a mediator's proposal were presented that made both sides give a little, I think it'd be foolhardy for either side to walk away.
Okay, let me jump over back to the plaintiff's room. We have 1 minute. Okay, I put on my my magician's cap, and I think the best we can do in this case is settle it at 1.4. That's my mediator's proposal. A little bit less than you want, a lot more than they wanted to pay. Do I have a yes?
We have to talk to our client
Okay.
and just invoke the Tom Petty. Waiting is the hardest part.
Yeah, plus the expense. It's just, to me, it's close enough to your number.
Are you telling me that I need to be reasonable and not just fair?
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Okay. Craig, are you okay with that?
Will they pay within 2 weeks?
Certainly.
No confidentiality.
No confidentiality.
And no lien nonsense in the settlement agreement.
Okay, let's all come back together because it's not fun.
Let's go on back on the screen. All right.
I thought we already prepared a settlement agreement, Craig.
I was in control of this one.
All right.
John's rodeo.
You guys were tough today. All right. Settled at 1.4, and we've run out of time. And presumably Katie's going to jump back in and tell us whether or not we've got questions to answer.
Yes, indeed. Thank you all. So we do have some questions here, indeed, that folks have submitted. One piece of housekeeping, if anybody does have to hop off, because we are at the hour, you will still receive MCLE credit. That will come via email by the end of the day today. As soon as you log off of the program, you will be directed to a short survey where you can give some feedback and submit any questions or ideas for future programs. We read all of the responses and would really appreciate if you take a couple of minutes to fill out that survey. Our speakers did agree to stick around for just a couple of minutes to answer some of these questions. So
actually, Katie, I've got to jump out. I've got a 1 o'clock conference call. Thank you, everybody. John, good to see you.
Chris.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Chris.
Oh, by the way, I give Doris gets the best background. It's just spectacular.
Yes, it does.
Bye.
Very holiday.
Bye-bye.
thank you so much. So there was a trend about in-person versus Zoom proceedings. What are your thoughts on having the parties do that? How important is it that defense be there in person? How important is it for them to meet the plaintiff face to face if they haven't already done so? What do you think?
Are they asking for the defense perspective, plaintiff's perspective, or is it silent as to that issue?
Silent as to that, slightly more general questions here.
I'll jump in and say that I think similar to trial work, in person is better. However, I have had successful Zoom mediations, and I've seen the light on that. And I have had the pleasure of working with a couple of mediators that handled the technology beautifully, and the separate rooms worked really, really well, and it all came together very nicely and over Zoom. So don't count that out if it's a possibility in your case.
And the nice thing is we get decision makers much more often on Zoom than we would in person.
Absolutely.
I'm sure
Yeah.
Patti.
And one other thing I'll throw in is that I've done at least a couple of mediations where people were in vastly different time zones. And we were still able to bring on different continents, we were still able to bring everybody together, in the same room, so to speak. So it does have its advantages.
Yeah. And I would say, I can't discount sometimes how beneficial it is to just walk down the hall and be able to talk to the folks in the other room if need be. But on the other hand, that I too found that the Zoom mediation has been very successful because if we agree to go to mediation, we agree to do the same thing, whether we're sitting there in person or over Zoom. So there you go.
Here's one on client control issues. What's your top tactic in keeping your clients calm, both plaintiff and defense, especially when the high numbers are flying around in the initial or early stages of mediation? So I'll pitch at random here. Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, again, this kind of comes down to communication and making sure that you've had plenty of time with your client to give them the full scope of what a mediation is like and what they should expect. My experience has been when anybody is in a situation where they have a sense of what to expect, they do better, right, than when they don't. And so this is where I think, again, Zoom can be really helpful. I had a mediation recently that we did by Zoom. I actually did it at my client's home. So we were on the same screen. It was much more comfortable for my client. I knew he was going to have a lot of anxiety about the mediation. I also knew that his wife was probably going to be a better, a more objective player in terms of helping with the mediation. And so by doing it there, he could go out in the backyard when he wanted to take breaks. He could go to the kitchen, take breaks. It made it easier for me on my side to manage the client so that the client was as comfortable as possible and the mediation had the greatest chance of success. Had we done this at offices like we used to, that would have been much more challenging, actually. So, so there's a benefit to the Zoom format.
I'd also say for the plaintiff side, even if it's on Zoom, which I have found the mediators to be very effective with, I generally want to always be with my client. They are not familiar with the process, and having that, personable connection makes it easier, I think, for them to trust the process. And then we're there to also, talk about what's happening in the room. And I think another client control mechanism, as you're looking at numbers flying around, is, particularly for people who need the economics, I think it's helpful there to have a discussion about, when we're talking about these numbers, here is how you're going to use that. And so don't pay attention to, X, Y, or Z, but let's focus on, what our goals are. And so a lot of it is white noise. And I think having to have those kinds of conversations, being in person with the client, is a lot easier than being remote on Zoom.
You just remind me of something that I wanted to ask during the program itself, and that is whether or not you want your clients present when the mediator comes in and presents the next offer. Because there are, attorneys who feel differently about that, and they want to control the messaging, and therefore don't want me to pull them out and present the offers just to them.
That's something I always like covering in our pre-mediation discussion, by the way, because it depends on my clients. Some have a very difficult time watching the sausage being made. They're not equipped for that. And so I don't want you in the room. I'd rather, we talk about it, then I can present the information, not because I'm worried about hiding anything from them, but as I said, it's not pretty sometimes. And, you as the mediator then have the freedom to be more blunt and not have to worry about those sensitivities. And then there are other clients where it's perfectly fine. Actually, they have, they're in a different mental space than some of my other clients, and that's helpful. It's helpful for them to hear it from you. So it depends, is the usual lawyer answer.
Yeah, I think I agree with Doris and Craig both. I think in most cases, generally speaking, I would prefer to have my clients with me and hear what you have to say. And that's because I trust you, John, or whoever our mediator is, and we have a good rapport. And I've already told them that I trust you. And so, in a lot of it, you diffuse the shock of hearing the numbers, the high or low numbers, by preparation, which everybody has already touched on. You have to tell people in advance what's going to happen and prepare them for that.
Okay.
Great. Well, I do want to be cognizant of everybody's time. We've stuck around for about 10 minutes extra, and I thank you for that extra time. If we didn't get to your questions, you are welcome to contact ADR Services or type your question into the survey, and I will take a look at those and pass them along to our speakers. I want to thank our panel and John for all of your time today in putting together this program. This has been very insightful. Thank you so very much.
Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Nice to meet you, Patti.
You too.
Good to see everyone else. All right,
Have
bye.
a great afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
ADR Services, Inc. has been your unwavering partner in alternative dispute resolution. But as the world changed, so did we. From virtual and hybrid hearings to our ongoing on-demand CLE program, ADR Services, Inc. continues to keep resolution and legal education at the forefront, woman-owned and operated from the start. There is someone for every situation. We are ADR Services, Inc.